The morning began with a quiet that felt almost sacred. A soft band of light stretched across the horizon, painting the savannah in warm golds and deep ambers, as though the land itself were waking from a long, peaceful dream. The tall grasses, heavy with dew, moved slowly in the cool breeze, shimmering like thousands of tiny mirrors catching the first breath of the sun. From a distance, the silhouettes of acacia trees stood like ancient guardians of the plains, their branches rising in crooked shapes against the brightening sky. It was a picture of calm and balance, the kind of morning where every creature seemed to breathe in time with the land. But this calm was never empty. It carried the low growls and gentle chirps of life beginning its day. At the center of this soft orchestra moved Maya, a dedicated wildlife researcher who had spent the last 3 years studying one of the region's strongest lion prides. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned the language of the wild, not spoken with words, but with patience, stillness, and respect. Her worn field notebook hung loosely in her hand, its pages filled with sketches, observations, and memories of countless mornings just like this one. Still, something about today felt different. Maya stopped near a rise in the land and lifted her binoculars. Down in the golden grass below lay the pride she had watched grow season after season. Satora, the powerful lioness with golden eyes and a broad, scarred muzzle, and her 3 cubs who tumbled around her legs in their usual morning play. The cubs were still small, all fluff and rounded paws, but they carried Satora's strength in their bones. The smallest one, Liko, was the soft-hearted troublemaker. He always wandered where he shouldn't, following every butterfly in shadow as if the world were a game made just for him. A light smile tugged at Maya's lips as she watched him pounce on his siblings, roll through the grass, then dash toward his mother for a clumsy cuddle. Nothing felt more peaceful than seeing young animals play, unaware of how fragile life in the wild truly was. But even as she watched, the hair along her arms lifted slightly. Something she couldn't name it, yet pulled at her attention. Like a quiet warning, she lowered her binoculars and scanned the horizon. A ring of vultures circled lazily overhead, far lower than usual for this hour. Herd animals in the distant, zebras, antelope, gazelles moved uneasily, shifting and pausing as though listening to something Maya could not hear. The breeze, warm and steady at sunrise, had begun to blow in sharp, broken bursts that stirred dust from the ground. None of these things were dramatic on their own, but together they whispered that the balance of the morning was tilting. Satora felt it too. The lioness lifted her head from grooming one of the cubs and stared into the distance, her ears pointed sharply forward. The easy calm in her chest rose and fell in shorter breaths. Her tail flicked once, then again cutting through the grass like a warning signal. Maya watched her with growing concern. Satora rarely showed fear, and when she did, it meant something in the land was changing. The cubs, however, carried none of their mother's caution. They bounced through the tall grass, chasing insects that sparkled in the light like floating sparks. Liko especially seemed full of restless energy. He wandered a little farther, each minute following a dragonfly that rose and dipped in the wind. Maya scribbled a note in her book, Liko exploring again, but she wrote it without her usual amusement. She couldn't shake the feeling in her chest. The sun climbed higher, spreading bright heat across the plains. Dust rose in tiny clouds. Around the herd animals, and the shadows of the acacia trees shrank beneath them. A sudden burst of birds took off to the east, their wings beating fast, leaving behind a sound that felt like a warning shout. Maya adjusted her binoculars again, scanning the nearby gullies and ravines created by last season's heavy rains. The land here held stories, some beautiful, some dangerous, and she knew that not all dangers in the savannah came with claws and fangs. "Stay close, little one," Maya whispered under her breath, even though Liko was too far to hear her. Satora's eyes flicked to her smallest cub, the one she always kept nearest during the early hours of the day. But this morning, even she seemed distracted by something Maya could not see, something hidden beneath the surface of the golden calm. Liko followed the dragonfly toward a narrow dip in the land, disappearing between tall yellow stalks that swallowed his tiny shape. For a moment, Maya expected him to reappear with a proud little prance, as he always did. But the grass remained still. The dragonfly rose and vanished. A strange silence settled over the patch of land where he had gone. Satora rose immediately, her muscles tightening beneath her golden coat. She let out a low call, a soft, gentle sound meant only for her cubs. Two came running back, tumbling over one another in confusion, but Liko did not return. Satora called again, louder this time. Amaya felt something heavy gather in her chest. Silence stretched across the savannah like a held breath. The land around. The pride darkened slightly as a thin cloud passed over the sun, dimming the gold and washing everything in a muted, worried glow. Even the wind slowed, brushing the grass in long, uncertain strokes. Maya stepped down the slope, moving closer to the pride's edge. Her boots pushed small puffs of dust into the air, each warm breath of the savannah rising like a faint question. She followed the tiny paw prints pressed into the dirt, their shapes soft and rounded, heading toward the gully ahead. Liko had wandered too far. She could feel it the way danger sometimes hides in the earth itself, waiting for a single careless step. Satora's deep voice rolled across the plains again, filled now with tension. The remaining cubs pressed close to her legs, sensing that something had gone wrong. Maya reached the top of the narrow gully and stopped. The air felt heavier here, thick with dust and the faint echo of something frightened. She leaned forward, studying the ground, the shadows, the uneven walls cut by past rains, and then she heard it, a faint, struggling sound from somewhere below. Cub's voice soft, scared. Liko. Maya's pulse quickened. The golden calm of the morning cracked like thin glass, replaced by a rising storm she could feel in her bones. The land was no longer peaceful. It was holding its breath. Behind her, Satora growled a deep, warning sound filled with fear and fury mixing into one. The calm before the storm was over, and the storm was coming fast. The cry was so faint at first that Maya wondered if she had imagined it. It sounded like a breath caught in the wind, a tiny echo rising from somewhere deep in the gully. She knelt at the edge, brushing away loose dirt as the light sharpened around her, turning the world into a maze of gold, shadow, and rising heat. The savannah had lost its gentle morning calm. Instead, it now felt heavy with expectation, as if the earth itself sensed a growing danger. Maya could feel Satora's presence behind her, powerful and restless, pacing back and forth like a storm cloud trying to hold back its own lightning. The lioness's growls vibrated through the ground, spreading tension through Maya's bones. The cub's cry rose again, this time clearer, sharper, and filled with panic. Maya's breath caught. She glanced up and saw Satora staring directly at her, golden eyes burning with fear and accusation. It was a look that said everything a mother could not speak with words. Bring my child back. But fear flickered there too, fear of losing the cub forever. The remaining two cubs, confused and frightened, pressed themselves beneath their mother's belly. Even they seemed to feel that the line between safety and loss was growing thinner with each passing second. Maya edged closer to the drop-off, her boots sliding slightly on the loose soil. Below her, the gully twisted into a narrow path of broken stones and dried mud. Shadows clung to the walls, making the air inside look darker and older than the morning above. Liko, Maya whispered, though her voice trembled with the knowledge that he was too far down to see her. She waited. A tiny, desperate sound floated upward in reply. The cub was alive, but he was trapped. A flash of movement at the corner of her eye made Maya turn. A small cloud of dust had erupted near the far side of the gully, where the ground dipped suddenly, forming a dangerous slope. That was where Liko had wandered. That was where the earth had swallowed him. Maya followed the trail of tiny paw prints stamped into the dust, so innocent and unprepared for what waited beyond the edge. They led to a narrow opening where the ground had crumbled inward, creating a steep drop carved out by last year's storms. The paw prints ended abruptly at the break where the soil gave way. Maya's stomach tightened. Liko hadn't simply wandered out of sight, he had slipped. She leaned forward carefully and listened. The gully swallowed sound strangely, turning even the smallest echo into a haunting whisper. A warm gust of wind swept through it, carrying the dusty smell of baked earth and the sound of distant birds fleeing farther east. Overhead, vultures circled even lower, their wings slicing through the rising heat. Each rotation felt like a countdown. Behind her, Satora released a low, urgent call, a mother's summons. It echoed off the gully walls, rolling downward like thunder. Usually, her cubs would respond immediately, bounding back to her warmth and safety. But this call was answered only by silence. A thick, painful silence that made Maya's hands shake as she gripped the edge of the earth. She remembered how just minutes ago, Liko had been chasing a dragonfly, stumbling through the tall grass with all the innocence of a child who believed the world was soft and forgiving. He had followed beauty into danger without realizing how far he had wandered from his mother. And now, all that remained of his playfulness was a frightened cry rising from below the earth. Maya slid down the first gentle part of the slope, careful not to send rocks tumbling onto the cub. The heat inside the gully felt hotter, trapped between its narrow walls. Sweat gathered on her forehead as she steadied herself with one hand against a rough patch of stone. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, though her voice wavered with fear. "I'm coming." "Out!" Dora roared again, louder this time, the sound bursting through the narrow space like a blast of fire. The force of her voice echoed off the walls, shaking dust loose and sending small bits of earth cascading down the gully. Maya froze. She knew Satora was not roaring at the cub. She was roaring at her. To a lioness, there was no difference between a threat and a stranger stepping toward her hidden child. Maya understood the danger clearly. One wrong move could not only put her life at risk, but also doom the cub she was trying to save. She looked back up at the ridge. Satora stood tall, tail lashing with fear and fury, her eyes burning with the wild instinct to protect. Yet she did not leap. She did not attack. Instead, she let out a deep, trembling growl that felt like a warning and a plea combined. Maya lifted her hands, showing she meant no harm. "I have to help him," she said softly, even though she knew Satora could not understand her words. But maybe the lioness understood something else, intent, desperation. For 3 years, Maya had watched this pride from a respectful distance, never interfering, never frightening them. She had been a harmless shadow on the edge of their lives. Today, that shadow stepped closer, and Satora could not decide whether to trust or strike. The cub cried again, louder, as if feeling the weight of the moment above him. Maya forced herself to move, inching deeper into the gully. The path narrowed, forcing her to crouch as the walls pressed inward. Every sound seemed amplified, the scrape of her boots on stone, the whisper of dust falling, the heavy breaths of both woman and lion. A broken piece of old metal glinted beneath the dirt near her feet, half buried by time. Maya's heart dropped. This was no natural gully. It was part of a collapsed poacher's trap, one of the hidden wounds left in the savannah long after the danger had passed. Liko had slipped into a place meant to kill. She knelt beside the dark opening where his voice echoed upward. The air felt colder here, shadowed by earth and memory. She reached her hand inside, letting her fingers touch only air. "Liko," she whispered again. This time, the cub answered with a trembling whimper. Maya felt a surge of determination run through her. She didn't care how deep the pit was or what dangers lay below. She only knew that a life needed saving, a tiny, innocent life that didn't understand why the world had suddenly turned dark. She pressed her palm against the crumbling edge and peered inside. Just then, a sharp crack echoed through the gully as a piece of stone gave way behind her. Maya turned sharply, expecting to see Satora descending. Instead, she saw the lioness leaning over the ridge, her massive body framed by the bright sky. And in her eyes, Maya saw something she had never seen before. Fear that looked almost human. For a moment, everything stopped. The wind, the birds, even the sun's warmth seemed to freeze. Maya and Satora stared at each other across the broken throat of the earth. Connected by the cry of a lost child, the gully grew silent again. Too silent. The real danger was only beginning. Dawn crept slowly over the savannah, spilling soft gold across the grasslands, as if nature itself wished to soothe the chaos of the long night. The air was still heavy with tension, carrying the faint scent of dust and fear. The woman knelt beside the exhausted lion cub, her hands trembling as she checked his breathing, her heart pounding with the weight of what she had just survived. But even in the quiet morning light, she could feel the presence of the lioness watching her from just beyond the tall grass. The mother's silhouette stood perfectly still, her chest rising and falling in slow, controlled breaths, her amber eyes fixed on the human who had dared to approach her child. For a moment, neither moved. It was a fragile moment suspended between survival and surrender. A moment where one wrong breath could shatter everything. The cub whimpered softly, lifting his weak head toward the shadows where his mother waited. It was a sound so small, so fragile, that it broke whatever invisible boundary existed between them. The lioness stepped forward, not in a rush, not in rage, but in a slow, deliberate stride that carried the weight of a queen reclaiming her throne. The woman froze, her palms pressing into the earth, her knees steady even as every instinct inside her begged her to run. She lowered her gaze not out of fear, but out of respect, almost as if acknowledging that in the heart of the wild, she was nothing more than a visitor, a witness to a mother's desperate love. The lioness stopped inches away from her cub, lowering her head to nuzzle him with a tenderness no human could ever mistake. The cub responded weakly, pawing gently at her face, whimpering with relief. The woman exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours, realizing she was watching something sacred unfold. But then, something unexpected happened, something that left everyone, who would later watch this footage in complete disbelief. The lioness looked up and locked eyes with the woman, not with fury, not with warning, but with a deep, lingering silence that carried an unspoken truth. In that haunting stare, there was gratitude. There was fear. There was the primal understanding shared only between two mothers, one human, one wild, both willing to risk everything for a child. Slowly, impossibly, the lioness stepped aside, leaving a small space between her and the cub, an invitation for the woman to finish freeing the last vine strand still tangled around the cub's hind leg. For a moment, the world held its breath. The wind paused. The birds quieted. Even the sun seemed to pull its light closer, curious about this impossible alliance forming in the dust. The woman reached forward, her hands steady now, cutting away the final fibers. The cub limped forward voluntarily, brushing against her arm in a gesture so gentle it nearly brought her to tears. And then, with a low rumble, the lioness nudged her cub behind her and slowly backed away into the tall golden grass. But before she vanished completely, the lioness glanced back, a single, fleeting look that carried the weight of the entire savannah behind it. It was a look that said, "We are even. Our worlds collided today, and for a moment we understood each other." The woman remained kneeling long after they disappeared, too overwhelmed to stand, too changed to return to who she was before this encounter. The wild had shown her cruelty, yes, but it had also shown her mercy. A mercy wrapped in teeth and instinct, in claws and courage. In a mother's desperate devotion, as the sun rose higher, warming the plains and pulling the morning fog away, the woman finally stood. She gathered her tools, dusted off her trembling hands, and walked back toward camp, each step echoing with the silent lesson the lioness had taught her. That in the heart of nature, survival is not just about power or fear. Sometimes it is about trust. Sometimes it is about allowing worlds to meet, not as enemies, but as guardians of the life that ties them all together. And as the camera faded out across the golden horizon, one quiet truth lingered in the wind. In the wild, fear is nature's language, but so is compassion. For several days, the savannah held an unusual kind of quiet, as though the land itself was still processing the unlikely truce forged between a human and a lioness. The woman, still shaken, yet deeply changed, resumed her work with the ranger team, surveying the grasslands with new eyes. Every rustle of dry brush, every distant roar carried a different weight now, no longer just signs of wildlife, but echoes of a mother's love she had witnessed up close. Yet as the sun dipped lower each evening and the plains turned molten gold, she couldn't shake a growing unease. Something felt different in the rhythm of the wilderness. The animals were restless. Herds moved with nervous urgency. Birds changed flight paths abruptly. Even the wind seemed to whisper warnings through the tall grass. Then, one dawn, the silence broke. A distressed roar rolled across the plains, the kind that shivered through the marrow of anyone who heard it. The woman froze, instantly recognizing the voice. It was the lioness. But this cry carried no warning, no territorial demand. It carried pain, panic, desperation. The woman grabbed her binoculars and sprinted toward the sound. Her boots pounding the earth with a speed fueled not by duty, but by something far deeper, connection forged in shared danger. Behind her, 2 rangers called out for her to wait, but their voices dissolved into the wind as she pushed forward. Determined to reach the source before it was too late, when she crested a low ridge, the scene below almost stopped her heart. The lioness stood circling her cub, not with affection, but with frantic urgency. The cub lay on his side, trembling violently, his breaths shallow and uneven. He wasn't trapped this time. He was poisoned. Scattered around the ground were fragments of tainted meat left by poachers to kill scavengers and predators indiscriminately. The lioness let out another agonized cry, nudging her cub's head, licking his ears, pacing in tight circles as if she was trying to fight death itself with her own body. It was a cruel twist of fate. The same cub she had risked everything to save had now fallen victim to an invisible enemy. The woman approached slowly, announcing herself with low, steady breaths. She knew the lioness remembered her. But memory alone could not override the primal terror of a mother watching her child slip away. The lioness spun toward her, teeth bared, tail lashing the air like a whip. But the woman didn't stop. She lowered herself, palms open, voice trembling yet resolute. "Let me help him," she whispered. "Please." Just like before. For several unbearable seconds, the lioness stood rigid, torn between instinct and desperation. And then, in a moment that mirrored their first encounter, but carried far more weight, the lioness stepped aside. Not fully, not confidently, but just enough. The woman knelt beside the cub, her hands moving from instinct and years of field training. She recognized the symptoms immediately. Toxic bait, fast-acting, cruel, and unforgiving. She grabbed her satchel, pulling out antipoison vials, hydration packs, and the emergency compounds she prayed would be enough. As she worked, the lioness paced around them in tight circles, puffing, snarling, crying, her anxiety crackling through the air like electricity. Every second was a battle. Every shallow breath from the cub was a reminder of how fragile life truly was. Sweat dripped down the woman's brow as she injected the antidote, massaged the cub's neck and whispered encouragement, her voice cracking with fear. Minutes felt like hours. The plains fell silent again, as if all of nature were holding its breath. Then the cub stirred. First a twitch, then a weak gasp, then a faint attempt to lift his head. The lioness froze mid-step, her entire world collapsing into that single, fragile movement. She crept forward, nudging her cub with trembling urgency. And when he responded barely but unmistakably, the lioness released a low, trembling chuff that was equal parts relief and exhaustion. The woman sat back in the dirt, her hands shaking, tears streaking down her dust-covered face. She had saved him. Again, but what happened next was something no one on the ranger team would ever forget. The lioness stepped toward the woman, slowly, deliberately, her massive paws silent on the earth. The rangers, who had finally caught up, tensed hands hovering near their tranquilizer rifles. But the woman did not move. The lioness lowered her head and brushed her forehead gently against the woman's shoulder. A gesture so soft, so profoundly vulnerable, that even the rangers stood speechless. It lasted only a moment. One breath, one heartbeat. Then the lioness returned to her cub, curling protectively around him as the sun rose behind them, painting the moment in gold. And there, on that morning, drenched in light, the woman understood something she would carry for the rest of her life. The wild was not simply savage or gentle. It was both. It could destroy without warning, yet choose mercy when mercy was least expected. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, the wild allowed you to stand close enough to witness those truths for yourself. The cub's recovery was slow, odd, fragile, and uncertain. For the next 2 days, the woman and her team kept a watchful distance, monitoring the lioness and her weakened child from a camouflaged perch on a nearby ridge. The plains stretched endlessly before them, vast, golden, and deceptively calm. But beneath that calm, the savannah hummed with quiet tension. Poachers had been sighted on the western edge of the reserve, leaving behind poison bait, snares, and footprints that cut through the earth like scars. The rangers worked tirelessly, dismantling traps and scanning for tracks. Yet the threat felt like a shadow that followed no matter how far they walked. And as each hour passed, the woman couldn't shake one thought from her mind. The lioness had already suffered enough. On the dawn of the third day, a thin mist draped itself across the plains. The woman stepped out of her tent, taking in the cold morning air that tasted of dew and dust. She raised her binoculars toward the lioness's territory. What she saw made her chest tighten. The cub was standing, unsteady, trembling, his legs wobbling, but standing. And next to him, the lioness nudged him forward with gentle, rhythmic encouragement, guiding him through slow, deliberate steps like a mother teaching her newborn to walk for the first time. The sight washed over the woman with a wave of relief so powerful that her eyes stung. Against every odd, against poison and pain and fear, the cub had chosen life. But as the morning unfolded, something shifted in the lioness's behavior. She kept looking toward the west, her ears pricked, muscles tense, tail low. The woman recognized the pattern immediately: alertness, agitation, silent scanning. Something was approaching, something the lioness could sense long before any human could. The woman climbed the ridge for a better view, her heartbeat thudding like distant drums. And then she saw them. 3 figures moving low through the grass. Not lions, not hyenas, men, armed, and heading straight for the lioness and her cub. Her stomach dropped. She grabbed her radio, calling the rangers with a voice tight and shaking. The response crackled through. "We're 5 minutes away. Hold position." But 5 minutes was too long in the wild. Too long when death walked with rifles and quiet footsteps. The woman didn't hesitate. She ran. She sprinted across the plains with a speed she didn't know she had, her boots kicking up clouds of dust, her breath breaking in sharp bursts. Behind her, the ridge shrank. Ahead of her, danger grew with every step. When she reached the lioness, the great cat was already standing tall, body angled protectively in front of her cub. She growled not at the woman, but at the approaching threat. The woman understood instantly. The lioness saw her not as an intruder now, but as an ally. The 2 mothers, one human, one wild, stood side by side, both ready to defend the same fragile life trembling behind them. The grass parted. The poacher stepped into the clearing, and in that moment, time felt like it paused, hanging on a knife's edge. Guns lifted. The lioness roared, a sound so deep it vibrated through the earth. But the woman raised her hands and stepped forward, placing herself between the rifles and the lioness. Her voice cracked with fear, yet she spoke with a steadiness born from something greater than courage. "Leave," she commanded. "You won't touch them." The poachers hesitated, not because of her words, but because the lioness behind her was coiled to strike. Muscles flexed, eyes burning with primal fury. A single shot would bring death to everyone in that clearing. And maybe. They knew it then. Distant shouts broke through the tension.
"The rangers!"
Racing toward them. Engines roaring. Boots pounding. The poachers spun, cursing under their breath, disappearing back into the tall grass-like shadows, fleeing the rising sun. The woman exhaled in a trembling burst of relief, her whole body shaking. She turned toward the lioness, unsure what would come next. But what happened was something she never saw coming. The lioness, still breathing hard, still trembling with adrenaline, stepped forward and pressed her head gently against the woman's hip. A gesture of trust, of recognition, of something deeper, something ancient, something shared only in moments when 2 worlds collide. The cub limped forward and rested against his mother, blinking weakly at the woman, as if remembering the hands that had brought him back from the edge as the rangers arrived. The lioness led her cub away, disappearing into the shimmering golden grass, her tail flicking once a silent farewell, or perhaps a promise, and the woman watched them go with a heart so full it hurt. The wild, she realized, had a way of remembering. Not with words, not with gratitude, but with gestures that spoke louder than any language ever could. The sun was sinking low, spilling orange fire across the plains, when the moment everyone feared finally arrived. The woman had just lifted the weakened cub from the pit, her arms trembling under his small but desperate weight. Dust clung to her clothes, sweat streaked down her face, and the savannah air felt tight, almost electrified. Every step she took toward the surface felt heavier than the last, as if the earth itself were bracing for what was about to unfold. Above her, the lioness prowled in jagged circles, her tail flicking sharply, her ears pinned back. Fear, rage, and instinct twisted through her like a storm with no center. And somewhere in all that noise, her child's faint cry cut through everything like a spark thrown into dry grass. The moment the woman's head cleared the edge of the pit, the lioness exploded into motion. She lunged forward with a force that shook the ground, her muscles coiling and releasing like a spring freed from tension. Her roar ripped through the air deep, raw, and ancient a sound pulled from thousands of years of instinct. The rescuers on the ridge flinched. Birds scattered in chaotic bursts. Even the wind seemed to stumble for a moment. But the woman didn't run. She couldn't. In her arms was a cub who couldn't survive a fall. So she did the only thing she knew. She stood her ground, holding the trembling little lion close to her chest, whispering shaky words even though she knew the lioness couldn't understand them. "I'm helping you. I'm helping him." The rangers sprinted across the grass, shouting warnings. Their tranquilizer rifles were raised, but trembling, no one wanted to fire, not unless they had absolutely no other choice. One wrong shot, one misplaced dart, and this entire rescue could collapse into disaster. The lioness skid to a stop mere steps from the woman. Her claws tore into the dirt, sending up small sprays of earth. Her breath came in sharp, heavy bursts. Her golden eyes were wild, burning with emotions too tangled to name. She was not choosing violence. She was reacting to the one truth the wild teaches better than any mother. On Earth, losing a child is unthinkable. For a moment, no one breathed, not the rangers, not the woman, not even the lioness. The world shrank to a single, trembling heartbeat. The cub whimpered, a soft, broken sound that sliced through the tension like a knife. And instantly, everything changed. The lioness's posture faltered. Her growl weakened. Her eyes shifted not from the woman's face, but from the cub in her arms. She saw him clearly now. Alive, weak, scared, but alive. Her entire body softened, just slightly, as if someone had taken the weight of the entire savannah off her shoulders, still holding her ground. The woman slowly crouched. Her knees shook so hard she thought they might give out beneath her. She didn't break eye contact with the lioness. She didn't speak. Words were meaningless now. Instead, she lowered the cub into the long grass, inch by inch, until his tiny paws brushed the earth. His little tail twitched once. His chest rose and fell in small, desperate breaths. The lioness took a single step forward, then another. Her growls faded into a low rumble, less a threat and more a warning. Any sudden movement, any sign of danger, and she would fight until the plains turned silent again. Behind the woman, the rescuers froze, barely daring to blink. Dust blew gently across the clearing, settling around the cub like a fragile blanket. The lioness lowered her massive head and touched her nose to her son's fur. The cub let out a thin, shaky cry and pressed himself against her muzzle. Relief rolled through her body so visibly that even the rangers felt it. Her tail relaxed. Her shoulders sank. The fury in her eyes dimmed, replaced by aching fear, and then something close to gratitude. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. A mother recognizing another being who had chosen not to harm what she loved most. The woman backed away slowly, her palms open, her breath still unsteady. She stumbled once, catching herself in the grass. The rangers moved to support her, but she waved them off, whispering, "Not yet. Give her space." She knew the lioness needed this moment, this quiet, trembling reunion more than anyone standing there. For several long, heavy seconds, the lioness remained curled over her cub, shielding him from everything. Only when she felt certain that danger had passed did she lift her head again. Her eyes met the woman's. The wind stilled. The air thickened. It felt as though the entire savannah paused to witness this impossible exchange between worlds. There was no fear now, no anger. Only a fierce, silent understanding. Finally, with one powerful motion, the lioness gathered her cub beneath her and stepped back into the grass. Her paws sank softly into the earth. Her form blended into the golden light. The rescuers exhaled together, a shaky, shared breath that released the tension trapped in their chests. The woman remained kneeling, her hands still open. She watched the lioness disappear into the plain's embrace. The savannah began to move again. Birds chirped. The wind picked up. The world resumed its rhythm, as if acknowledging that something ancient had just been settled. The woman rose to her feet, her voice barely a whisper as she said, she understood. She really understood, and in that fading light, surrounded by grass swaying like amber waves, the rescuers realized they had witnessed something that few humans ever would. The fury of a mother. Transformed into something far greater, the world felt impossibly quiet in the moments. After the lioness vanished into the tall grass with her cub, the woman stood frozen, her breath still trembling from the storm that had nearly swallowed them all. Around her, the rescuers moved slowly, too slowly, as if afraid to disturb the fragile thread of peace that now hung in the air. Even the savannah seemed unsure of what came next. The wind paused. The grass lay still. Above them, the sun hovered at its peak, turning every grain of dust into floating sparks of gold. It was a strange kind of silence, a silence that didn't belong to fear, but to awe. But the woman knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Lakatha cub she had held against her chest was still too weak to walk more than a few steps. And the lioness Satora was disappearing deeper into the plains, putting distance between them with every stride. Distance the cub couldn't afford. The woman swallowed hard. She had saved him from a trap in the earth, but now she would need to save him from the quiet dangers above it. Dehydration, heat, exhaustion. She knew lions like Satora moved with purpose. The lioness was searching for a safe place to rest, but she would not slow down for a weakened child. The woman stepped forward carefully, her eyes fixed on the faint trails in the grass. The rescuers behind her exchanged nervous glances. One of them whispered, "We can't follow her. It's too dangerous," and he was right. Following a mother lion was a gamble no ranger wanted to make, but doing nothing could cost the cub his life. The woman inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of a choice no human should ever have to make. "I'll go alone," she murmured. "She already knows me. She won't see me as a threat." The team didn't argue. They understood. Some moments in the wild demanded instinct over logic, heart over fear. With her shoulders squared and her steps slow and deliberate, the woman moved through the grass. The savannah brushed against her arms, warm and whispering, like the breath of an ancient world watching her every step. She wasn't trying to catch up to the lioness. She only wanted to get close enough to ensure the cub kept moving. Close enough to make sure Satora knew she was still there, still helping, still protecting the fragile life they now guarded together. She found the cub minutes later. He had collapsed in the shade of a low thorn bush, his small chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths. The lioness stood just ahead, looking back with fire in her eyes. Not anger, but desperation. She nudged Liko gently, urging him to stand, but the cub barely lifted his head. That was the moment the woman realized something deep and undeniable. Satora could not save her child alone. Not today. Not like this. The woman crouched slowly, her palms open, lowering herself until she was almost level with the cub. Satora growled, low and trembling, but she didn't move closer. It was as if the lioness was holding herself back with every ounce of discipline she possessed. The woman whispered quietly, her voice soft as a drifting breeze. "I'm not taking him from you. I'm only helping him get back to you." She reached out, inch by inch, giving the lioness every chance to stop her. But Satora didn't. Instead, she watched with eyes full of exhaustion and raw fear as the woman lifted Liko once again, cradling him gently, supporting his fragile body like a second heartbeat against her chest. The moment felt unreal, like witnessing two worlds finally touching, finally understanding, finally trusting in a way that defied instinct and history. The lioness stepped closer. Close enough that the woman could feel her breath warming the back of her hand. Close enough that the line between danger and trust blurred into something sacred. Slowly.
Yeah.
The woman set the cub down in a small patch of soft grass. She didn't step back yet. She gave the lioness time to come forward, time to take him back. Time to understand that the human hands holding her child meant no harm. Liko whimpered, his small body trembling as he tried to push himself upright. The lioness lowered her head, nudging his side, licking his fur with deep, sweeping strokes. The cub responded weakly, pressing himself against her. The woman felt something inside her crumble, something tight, painful, and indescribably human. This was the moment she had been fighting for. Not the rescue, not the adrenaline, not the danger, but this quiet reunion, this fragile breath of safety, this proof that compassion could survive even in the wildest corners of the earth. And then something extraordinary happened. Satora lifted her head. Her golden eyes locked onto the woman's. There was no roar this time, no tension, no threat. Only a deep, ancient recognition, as if the lioness were acknowledging what words could never say. The woman felt the weight of that gaze settle into her bones. She knew she would never forget it. And she knew the lioness wouldn't either. A soft breeze moved through the clearing then, stirring the grass around them. The earth seemed to exhale, releasing the fear it had held. Satora nudged her cub closer, and with a slow turn, began guiding him back toward the golden plains. She did not run. She did not hide. She walked with steady, deliberate steps, allowing the woman to watch, to witness, to honor the moment as it unfolded. Behind them, the rescuers emerged from the distance, their faces still pale with disbelief. They watched silently as the lioness carried her cub toward safety, disappearing into the shimmering waves of tall grass. No one spoke. No one needed to. The woman sank to her knees, overwhelmed by the quiet enormity of what had just taken place. She had crossed a boundary few humans ever dared to cross, and somehow, the wild had chosen not to push her back. Instead, it had allowed her in. Not fully. Not forever. But enough to understand a truth older than the plains themselves. That motherhood, in all its forms, speaks a language deeper than fear. Deeper than instinct. Deeper than the wild itself. And as the lioness vanished into the horizon, the woman knew this moment would live inside her forever. Not as a victory. Not as a miracle. But as a reminder that sometimes the wild doesn't need to be tamed. Sometimes it simply needs to be understood. As the sun sank slowly toward the horizon, the savannah was bathed in molten gold and deep amber, painting every blade of grass and dust mote with the kind of light that seemed almost sacred. The woman sat on a low ridge, her knees drawn up, elbows resting against them, watching the plains stretch endlessly before her. Somewhere in the distance, the faint silhouettes of the lioness and her cub disappeared into the shimmering heat waves, their forms almost blending with the tall grasses. A mother and child returning to the rhythm of the wild. The air was warm, thick with the scent of sun-baked earth, and the lingering echo of dust stirred earlier by frantic paws and desperate hands. The day's chaos had passed, leaving a profound, almost reverent stillness in its wake. The wind whispered across the plains, carrying the faint hum of insects and the distant drumming of hooves as herds of antelope moved cautiously. Always aware, always alive. Birds circled lazily, settling once more into their evening routines, their shadows dancing across the amber ground. For a moment, it felt as though the world had exhaled relief, settling over it like a soft blanket. The woman's chest rose and fell slowly. She had witnessed fury, desperation, and terror, but also courage, compassion, and the rare grace of understanding between species. The savannah, cruel yet magnificent, had revealed itself in ways she would carry forever. Every roar, every cry, every trembling paw print, had left its mark on her memory. A story written in the dust of the golden plains. She thought of the cub, fragile but alive, and of Satora, whose maternal instincts had burned brighter than any danger, any fear, or any human presence. The lioness had taught her something the wild teaches rarely, and only when one is willing to see that life is fragile, yet fiercely resilient. That trust, when earned, could bridge the gap between human and beast. That love, even in the rawest and most dangerous corners of the world, could be enough to save a life. And yet, she also knew the savannah held lessons far harsher. For every miracle, there was threat. For every act of courage, there was danger lurking beyond the horizon. The wild had rules older than memory, and its laws were not ours to rewrite. As shadows lengthened, painting stripes across the plains, the woman closed her eyes briefly and let the sounds of the evening wash over her. The rustle of leaves, the distant call of a jackal, the whisper of wind through the golden grasset, all seemed part of a living symphony. A reminder that life in the wild moved to its own rhythm, unbent by human schedules or emotions. She felt humbled, small, and yet profoundly connected. Today, she had stepped into that rhythm, had touched it, had intervened, but ultimately, it had been the lioness who led the story to its resolution. Nature, she realized, is rarely cruel or kind in human terms. It simply is. And in its raw truth, there is beauty, fear, grace in equal measure. The ridge beneath her felt warm as the last rays of sunlight draped the land. Dust rose softly in the evening breeze, catching the light like tiny sparks of memory, carrying the echo of every heartbeat, every roar, every desperate step that had led to survival. She whispered quietly to herself, almost as if speaking to the plains themselves. The wild remembers, and so will I. And in that moment, the horizon seemed to pulse with life, carrying her words across the distance to wherever Satora and her cub had gone. Perhaps in some way, only the savannah could understand. They had heard her, and they had carried that day with them, just as she would carry it in hers. As twilight deepened into dusk, a quiet truth settled over the land. The world moves on, indifferent yet aware, harsh yet capable of rare miracles. And in those moments when fear and compassion intersect, the savannah becomes a place where lessons are written in paw prints, dust, and the shared heartbeat of life itself. The woman rose slowly, brushing dust from her clothes, feeling the weight of what she had witnessed settled gently into her bones. The golden plains stretched endlessly ahead, mysterious and eternal. And she realized that some stories are bigger than a single day, bigger than a single life. They belong to the earth, to the wild, to the memory of all who survive. And as night crept across the horizon, the plains seemed to whisper one final truth, soft and unyielding. Fear and compassion often walk the same path. And in the wild, both are necessary to survive. The stars began to emerge, tiny pinpricks of light above the endless grass, and the woman sat back, watching as the savannah returned to its natural rhythm. Somewhere in the shadows and golden haze, a mother lion and her cub pressed together, safe, alive, and moving forward into another day. And though the events of today would fade from sight, they would never fade from memory. The echoes of courage, fear, and unwavering maternal love lingering in every gust of wind, every rustling blade of grass, every golden shimmer across the plains. The wild had spoken, and she had listened.